Welcome to the next episode of Navigating Carbon, your compass to carbon management. As always, I'm your host, Deb Ryan, and in this episode, I sat down with Mike Smith. Mike is the CEO of Aclymate, a company that helps small and medium-sized businesses estimate and understand their carbon emissions, and then help them look to offset in the voluntary carbon markets. Mike and I talk about the impact small and medium businesses have on the economy and why they are often overlooked and not well served in the climate conversation. We also discussed how companies look at their supply chain emissions and how they might need to rethink some of the work they're doing in this space. To stay on top of all upcoming episodes, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. But for now, sit back and enjoy my conversation with Mike. Hey everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Navigating Carbon podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mike Smith. Mike, welcome.
Hey, Deb, it's good to be here.
I'm so excited that you're here. So you're the CEO and founder of a company called Aclymate. Take us through what you guys do and how you kind of got started.
Yeah, absolutely. Aclymate is a carbon accounting tool for non-experts. So we help companies without sustainability teams to measure, reduce, report, and offset their footprint. Generally in that order. The report is kind of like one of the big things that's driving it. We have a kind of a differentiated solution to a certain extent because not only do we have the software, but we also have the right human services. So the humans that have to do this reporting and the emissions reductions, et cetera, they feel comfortable in it. That's a bit of a challenge because you have to do it at a price point that makes sense for typically our small to mid-sized businesses. So we do that really affordable, but also, approachable, easy to use carbon accounting.
I love that. And we're going to dive into some of the challenges in that small business space and stuff here in a little bit. But I wanted to start off with, you are known in the industry and in the space as the climate dad, which I love. Unpack that. Where did that come from? How did that come about? Because I love it.
Yeah, no. So for those that are listening instead of watching, you may notice I have some artwork behind me. I give off like a really strong dad vibe. That artwork is of my children. So there's that. I tend to be fairly paternal, I guess, in a lot of ways. And so my staff started referring to me as Climate Dad. And the reason they started referring to me as Climate Dad was one is not only that of this just general dad vibe that I give off, but also that uh, I would take things that were confusing and complex and often scary when they were talking about climate, because a lot of people, when they first start walking in climate, they get overwhelmed by all the bad climate news that's actually really all around us, and we kind of ignore until we're working on it full time. And I make that scary and complex stuff a little less scary and a little less complex, and that's pretty much what a parent does as you're as a child is turning into an adult, is you help them to kind of like make sense of what's going on in the world. So that's how the Climate Dad was born.
I love it. And for those that are interested, you can be found on Substack. And so you should go and subscribe to the Climate Dad Substack, which we can link in the show notes and stuff like that as well. And I kind of wanted to start there with, again, some of this idea of like unpacking really complex kind of pieces and some of the things that you're seeing as you're working with clients. Because I think you have a really unique perspective on this, and you posted an article recently around where you think the biggest opportunity is around like small and medium business and stuff. So I kind of just wanted to start there for folks because we often don't talk about small and medium sized businesses, and we probably should. So I'd love you to what are you seeing in that space, and what are we missing, and why is it such a big opportunity?
It's really huge, and there's not a lot of great studies about like kind of the impact of small business on climate, but fairly there are some pretty good correlative studies about like how economic activity kind of ties fairly tightly towards climate impact. And so, if you were to extrapolate that, U.S. small to mid-sized businesses, just in the United States alone, were they a standalone country, would be the fourth largest emitter on the planet, larger than Russia, larger than you know essentially every country in the world except for the United States, China, and I'm trying to remember the third might be India.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty big footprint, right? And the when people think about how to deal with climate, they tend to think of it as at the smallest levels, at the individual level. They also tend to think of it as the biggest levels.
Hmm.
And so you have individuals who are like, oh, what's your footprint? What are your decisions? And that's super important because, it takes many soldiers to make an army. And without like all those people kind of enlisting in the climate fight, like we're never going to get there. But it's also like at an individual level, not much. At the flip side of it, you have these huge companies that have like big sustainability teams that are starting to really get engaged in this. Some of it for regulatory pressure, some of it for, pressures from investors, et cetera. And so they're starting to do the work of it. But there are billions and billions of climate decisions that happen every day in between those two extremes.
Mm.
And what ends up typically happening is that um, the large companies, if they're interacting with these smaller companies, they tend to just kind of patronize them. They tend to think like, oh, there's no way that you'd ever be able to really do with this because it's so complex and like you just don't have the time for the complexity. And they're partially right. There can be a lot of complexity, and small businesses, small to mid-sized businesses typically don't have the time and the resources in order to be able to dedicate a lot of staff to this sort of thing. But it's also insulting because it is a patronizing sort of attitude that you don't want to enlist like huge part of the US economy, the world economy, in being able to be part of the climate fight.
Yeah.
And so that was, what I wanted to get on to work on.
It's such an important conversation because you talk about like, you guys are really kind of focused on that small to mid-sized business that don't have the teams. Like you said, you guys were going in to help those companies I say unravel, but like make it less complex and make sure that they can kind of do some of this work. And I know you and I have talked about this in the past in terms of like going back to, like revenue and tying emissions to revenue and being able to actually make it really simple. Like, have you seen, I'm really curious about some of the sort of almost the success stories and things that you've seen working with some of your clients that you've really seen that complex kind of piece become a lot more simple. Like how has that worked? How have you guys been sort of doing that? Like, I think it's great.
It's one of the biggest challenges actually in our sales is that people are so conditioned to think this is going to be really
Mm.
hard and this is going to be expensive and it's going to be time consuming. Oh my God, I don't have the time to be able to do this. And so a couple of examples that like once you kind of get over that hump, then people feel like very, very proud of it. One example would be Whitestone. They're a promotional products company, rapidly growing, but still on the smaller side. I think about 60 employees. They got started with this. They measured their footprint. They ended up like finding so much success with that they ended up setting a science-based target. And so you have a small company that's setting a science-based target. And like what's really, exhilarating for, a small company like mine, like at Acclimate is that they've built a lot of their brand, their whole company around what we're doing. And so, that's a success story. Promotional products in particular kind of has a bit of a checkered history associated with a lot of times they call it brand fill or just selling garbage, things that
Mhm.
people use once and then throw in the garbage. And so seeing a company like Whitestone kind of reimagine what that industry can be like, how they can be more sustainable, how they can use that and start thinking about into kind of like a net zero climate future, it's phenomenal. I'm really excited about that.
That's
The other
so
thing that I really like talking about is we're climate we're climate solutions for not climate people.
cool.
Like a lot of times, I think like you have to have like an identity associated with that, and like we can all visualize who that person is, right? Well, like what they drive, what they eat, and I love those people. Like those people are the ones that got this conversation moving. But in order for it to keep moving, it's got to kind of advance beyond that too. So we recently signed a customer called Circuit of the Americas. And Circuit of the Americas is the Formula One race in Austin, Texas. And when people think of climate, they don't typically think of motorsports.
No,
No, they
not at
don't,
all.
But under the hood, Circuit, like Formula One, is doing a lot of really cool stuff around climate.
Oh, that's
And so it's kind of fun to be like the climate solution for not climate people, for like the working stiff, the everyday Joe and Jane that like they care about the climate, but they've also got a lot of other things to do. And how can we help them get that
yeah.
moving?
And I mean, you talked about mobilizing an army, right? Like you talked about the individuals that are out, I've got solar panels on my house, like, we've got all these different things. We can make our individual choices. But given the size of the small business and medium-sized business that you're talking about, like it's huge. And I think most people do want to try and do the right thing. But when it's not, when there are so many other priorities and stuff, like it's just so difficult. So it's so cool to hear what you guys are doing in that. And like there's such fun success stories, right? It's like and it really is about telling a narrative and telling a story because yeah, I love that. It's really cool.
It's
Um,
I love working with the people that we work with. It's
yeah.
just it's a fun part of being in this sector of in this size of industry.
And I think as well, like the idea, and you talked about the order that people are doing things in, right? In terms of their measure, report, and then offset. And like by just getting that first piece done, where then the companies themselves can see that real progress, where they're like, okay, well, we did our initial baseline last year, and now that we've actually thought about this and made some changes, so that improvement as well is something that can really be driven just by getting started on some of this as well. Which again, the fact that you're talking about the fact that you're seeing small businesses actually starting to set targets and stuff, it's awesome. Like we've got to start somewhere, right? And if we
Yeah,
don't start
100%.
anywhere, we don't make any improvement. So
One of the things that we have come to learn in this process is about how human this is, and about like
mm,
that they're, at the core of any business solution is the idea that you're serving people.
mm,
And service, to individuals has been an important part of my life for a long time. But um, in this context, like, the vision for Acclimate is to educate and empower everyone for the world's best climate future, right? And so we really think about heavily on that education component too, which is that historically you had to learn a lot before you could do a thing, and we really believe that you need to be able to do the thing and learn in the process while you're doing it, and then it's okay to make those first steps, timid as they may be, poorly informed as they may be, but make those first steps and then learn as you go through the process. And so we like to be that education partner as well, where people learn about climate and become smarter through the act of acting on it rather than waiting to develop the certification or the expertise, or like 3 years later. Now I'm ready to get to work on climate and the whole world's changed. And by the way, we're 3 years closer to all of our deadlines.
yeah. Um, sort of sticking with that like education theme, I know you've done some work for like policymakers and things like that in the past, and you've talked about like how it wasn't that they wanted to like necessarily regulate people out of business or anything, but there was just so much confusion in it. Like, what are some of the lessons that you've had, like from some of that early kind of conversations around like what climate leadership looks like, and how do we do some of that education to get rid of the confusion for folks? Like,
Yeah. So the kind of the birth of Acclimate was associated with in my previous company that I founded. I was really focused on carbon offsets. This is how you and I got connected originally, specifically in reforestation, natural and working lands. And so I was invited to help kind of guide some policymakers at an outfit called the U.S. Climate Alliance, which are the at the time 26 states that were in the Paris Accords after the Trump administration during the first administration pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords. And so, like, when you think about climate policy, it's probably like federal level policy, right? So there is some excuse here a little bit. But most of these state policymakers some of them were like really well informed. Like the California delegation has long been, some of the thought leaders in the space. But a lot of the others, they were like, what's going on here? And so, they were kind of getting things wrapped around. But I got super frustrated because some of them were just not getting it. And when I got to thinking about like why are they not getting it, there was like two outcomes. One is maybe I need to be better at explaining it. So I've been kind of working on how I can be, clear, more coherent, more direct rather than technical, and then like help them explore the technical when they're interested. But the more important thing that I got to thinking about is that who are these people? They are intelligent, educated individuals that care about this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this job. And by the way, it's their job to care and learn about this sort of stuff. And if they're having a hard time getting their head wrapped around it, like immediately, then we've created a system that's too complex.
mm,
And again, getting back to those billions of climate decisions, if these people are going to be making policies that they're expecting the world to be able to enact, how are the people going to be able to enact them? And I don't want these people to be making decisions where they go, hey, this is complex. Therefore, nobody else will ever understand it. Therefore, we're going to create policies that are kind of top heavy and I think ultimately doomed to fail.
mm,
Um, because the only way that we're really going to be able to climate from a policy perspective is like the world's hardest policy problem. Um, you when you create some sort of regulation about it, there is no immediate cause and effect, right? So if I decide to, fly to, around the world in first class, or if I decide to, stay home for a vacation, the only climate effect that I see is nothing. I actually don't. There is no effect associated with that, right? Um, you also, even if I do that, like the climate effect will take years for it to kind of like build up there. It's a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas that we don't really see, even though like every time we're driving down the highway, we're effectively dumping about, 3/4 of a pound of pollution into the air. But we just don't see that because we don't taste it, smell it, or feel it. And so the only way that we're really going to ever be able to get this all going is if we empower lots of individuals to make smarter decisions all the time. And then there's some smart supporting regulations and business activities around that in order to kind of move this ball forward. And so I really, I'm used to be in the Navy, so I tend to lean towards some martial analogies. But like, it really does take many soldiers to make an army, and the best armies in the world empower individuals to make decisions at the local level in order to be able to move forward. Really heavy top down command and control mindsets are almost always doomed to fail against people that, or against organizations that empower individuals to make smart decisions at the local level.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's, this idea of building an army and stuff. I think, even just talking to like my friends and my family and things who are not in this space, who are not, they all do different things. But again, very smart individuals, very well educated and stuff. And you talked about how people kind of just glaze over, right? Like and whether it's, just the general news that's going on, but particularly around some of the climate stuff, I think figuring out how we tell that story, but also, and this is why I love, your climate dad thing of like, how do you simplify things and how do you tell a story, right? Like dads tell stories and then the children repeat those stories, right? Like, and it's such an important part of this because then it's not, we also start to break down some of the us and them. Because you also talked about, this condescension with the big companies and the little companies and some of this kind of stuff. Like we all do need to just work together to a certain extent and not, we need to celebrate the wins, but we also need, I think, and I'd be curious as your thoughts on this, we also need to be very kind of like gracious at what doesn't work to a certain extent. Like companies are not good about telling people what they tried and didn't work for fear of looking like a failure or, if a public company, their share price and stuff like that. And, but if I feel like if we tell authentic, genuine stories about the climate successes, but also like, hey, we did try this and actually it didn't work. Um, but we're not going to stop trying. Like, I don't know, like where do you kind of that evolution of that story, I think is so important as well. Like I don't know that we're very gracious with some of that, particularly not with businesses. So
I think that is an evolving mindset.
yeah.
And so we used to see this a lot in politics or in kind of your public persona on social media potentially, or in so many different ways where you had to have like this kind of manicured, presented image. And we were very careful about like what we looked like. I mean, it's still like that way on LinkedIn. Like, I like to think of like LinkedIn for, as a business owner, it's almost like Instagram for a teenage girl. Like there's so much pressure to, to look like you're the hero and the success story and all the rest of it. But the stories that I most resonate, the people that I find most interesting to follow, and I think this is a big thing that's starting to come out, especially in Gen Z and maybe a lesser extent the millennials, is an absolute thirst for authenticity.
Well,
This world is so fractured, especially the media environment, and the stories are so spun, that I think that's actually a big part of like kind of what's been driving TikTok.
mm,
Is that like it's unvarnished. It's very, there's a more of kind of a raw appeal to it. It's starting to get increasingly varnished and manipulated there too. But I think this generate everybody is just thirsting for authenticity. And so one of the things that I always encourage people and our customers to think about when they're talking about climate is that like share your wins and your failures in public.
mm,
And that will, it's, first of all, it's brand building. People will connect with a brand that is authentic, because a brand, to your point, is a story. It's a story about what is this organization, who are the people in it. We all have immediate associations in our mind when you think of like, oh, this person, they work at Apple, or this person works at Patagonia, or this person works at Exxon.
yeah.
And like it or not, like that is just part of of being human, right? Which is that like I actually don't know anything about this person. When I, if I first hear about them, but if I think that they worked at Coke, Coke has a reputation of hiring smart, intelligent executives. And so I immediately think, well, that's probably a smart, intelligent executive. And so that story, uh, if you are an authentic brand around what you're doing in climate sustainability more broadly, that story not only attaches to the brand, but it also attaches to all the people that work at the brand. It also attaches to all the people that sell and buy from the brand. And so live your life in public. Don't be afraid to
Yeah.
be the man in the arena. You know, it's a Teddy Roosevelt poem, maybe prose more likely, about don't be that timid soul that neither knows, the taste of victory nor defeat. But be the person that is, willing to be down in the dust and the blood in order to strive for victory. And I think people will really connect with that.
I love that. And it's so true. And I mean, on the flip side of that, then when things go wrong, I was actually following a car, Tesla yesterday, and it had all the stickers on it that was like, I bought this before Elon went crazy, right? But Tesla sold a story and they sold a brand, and unfortunately, they've done a lot of damage to that now. And so it's interesting to see kind of how brands like build, and then, you've got to, again, not to maintain that story, but yeah, it is about authenticity, and they do see through that then if it's not authentic and it's not real as well. So it's kind of an interesting evolution that we're seeing on some of these things as well.
Yeah,
Um,
with Elon, I think it's a kind of a story of leadership, which is like
yeah,
because often we now connect brands to their leaders, right? And
it's
again,
true.
about the authenticity of leadership and about if also about remaining humble.
Mm,
Um, l- Elon just started drinking his own Kool-Aid, and it ended up actually like destroying his own personal brand. Like, he was an
yeah.
Iron Man, for goodness sakes. Like, he was supposed to be like the human embodiment of like Tony Stark. And now I don't know of a whole lot of anybody that likes the guy very
Yeah.
much. Certainly not, any of his ex-wives or kids. So,
Yeah.
just about like in that don't let that authentic personality of being in public also kind of like poison who you are as an individual.
Mm.
Remind it, find ways as a brand and as an individual to stay humble.
Yeah. The leadership piece, I think, it's a really important point, right? Like, it's like, how do we find those authentic leaders who do want to make a change? And it's not, it then also drives like people wanting to work at those companies and things like that as well. So I think culture is often, I think, overlooked in the conversation around how do we engage and how do we have these conversations about climate that are very politicized right now, um, all over the world, not even just here in the US. And so it's the leadership piece, and seeing that authentic leadership is going to be really critical to getting people building that army, like you talked about. So,
Yeah, these are all human systems, and you have to interact with humans in order to make that work. And I like to. I think I've shown you my phone case before, but for the listeners, it's a chimp in a suit. And we like to think that, like, as humans, that we're very rational and we all make our decisions with the forebrain. But man, our simian ancestry is controlling a lot of how we interact with people. And so you got to use that forebrain to make sure that you're thinking about how do we all interact in order to build good organizations, good relationships with the people outside of our organizations, and lives for ourselves.
mm, very cool. So, final topic that I wanted to pivot to, that I know you're very passionate about as well, but like, not only are we trying to figure out emissions for like the individual company, but we're also trying to figure out our supply chains. And you mentioned again when we were talking about the bigger companies and stuff often have these huge teams trying to do it and stuff like that. Like, it's a challenging problem, and like people are trying to figure it out. But like, what's your kind of take on that? Like, are we doing it right? Are we going about it in the right way? Like, I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are and what you've seen on that supply chain piece, beyond just, the direct emissions that companies have for themselves.
We seem to not be learning the lessons of the past, and so I think that there's a way forward, and it's kind of the whole reason that Acclimate exists. But a big part of also why Acclimate was created was when we looked at Walmart. So for those that aren't familiar, Walmart had this Project Gigaton. They announced it, I think, in 2015, way early, kind of in like the public discussion around climate. And as the title would imply, they were trying to cut 1 billion tons of emissions from their supply chain. And Walmart, if you are not familiar, is the absolute King Kong of supply chains. Like they have like an iron control over everybody that supplies to them. And in that process, they ended up declaring victory last year, I think, and that they had cut 1 billion, tons out of their supply chain. But there was, when you look under the hood, there was actually some disturbing's too strong of a word, but some they took some liberties with that claim.
Okay.
The first one is I'm not sure they really cut 1 billion tons out of their emissions, or as much as they got to take credit for that 1 billion tons were cut. A lot of that has to do with just like the decarbonization of the U.S. electric grid, and so through no efforts of their suppliers, et cetera. The other part of it is that they only were able to engage about 6% of their supply chain.
Oh, wow.
That six, yeah. It was a very material, large part of their supply chain, but it effectively was only their tier one, maybe their tier two suppliers. And when you looked at those suppliers, most of them had sustainability teams too. And so they weren't able to get any penetration down lower into their supply chain, even though they can do it in everything else. And I mean, I've always been a little skeptical of people that say they can't really manage their supply chain because, like, when they really have wanted to do it in history, like United Fruit, like subjugated millions of people and destroyed, governments in Latin America for decades, all in order to control supply chain. Like corporate will, if they really wanted to get
Yeah.
after this, they could, right? So they were only able to do that, and the reason is I don't think that they resourced it enough, and I, in particular, don't think that they were thinking about it right. They weren't thinking about the idea of like what they needed to do was empower their supply chain to make smarter decisions and to work with them a little bit more cooperatively in kind of a data infrastructure. And so that's kind of the idea behind Acclimate, which is like if you're thinking of this as a top-down problem, you're thinking about it wrong. What you really need to be thinking of it as a bottom-up problem and that's going to need a bottom-up solution. And so you want to get not down to your tier one, you want to get down to the people that are making the material, you know,
Yeah.
if you can get all the way down to the mine, and then have this additive process as people are moving it through the chain. Like how can they get uh, the right carbon accounting moving forward at every step of the process. And then when you have that and you have that degree of visibility, you start unlocking a lot of really cool things. One, you're empowering all those individual foot soldiers to make smarter decisions and you're giving them kind of a coherent guidance associated with that. But two is you start offering the opportunity for really true insetting, the ability to actually spend money within your supply chain to pay the people to make the efficiency upgrades because it's important from you from a climate and a sustainability point. And without that level of data confidence, I don't think you're ever going to really be able to do much in the way of insetting, except for maybe at the tier one supplier again. But like the tier one is not where most of the decisions are being made.
Yeah. And again, only made up 6% of their actual supply chain, which is crazy. Um, so it's fascinating statistics around that. And I think it brings up a question of um, data transparency and data generally, which I think is something there's been a bit of an attack on data and reporting of data and stuff recently. It's something I've been writing about. But like, how do you sort of think about like where all this data is going to come from and how we're going to empower people to we can't fix what we don't measure. And we got to start somewhere with these baselines. Like, I don't know. I'm curious as to your thoughts on like data and data transparency and how that's going to empower some of this as well.
Deb, are you there? We seem to have had a bit of a drop there. Do you hear me now?
Yes. Are you back?
I am. I'm not sure what happened there.
My internet died.
You just, oh, okay. There we go. So,
I got a thing. I was like, your
got it.
internet's unstable. Reconnect. I was like, shit. So I'm clearly back. You just didn't get my next question. Like you finished your bit and then
I,
I disappeared.
I got half of the about data transparency
Okay.
and that you've been
I can
writing about
redo
that.
that.
Do you want to just kind of repose the question?
Do you want to talk about data transparency? It's something I'm really passionate about. So,
Yeah, let's do it. Fun.
really given that,
I'm always happy to talk about anything with you, Deb.
appreciate that. Um, okay. So as we think about the supply chain and the data, what do you there's been a bit of an attack on data and like reporting of data and things like that. And something I'm quite passionate about. If we don't start somewhere with reporting of data and transparency around data, then we won't ever see any improvement and we won't be able to help and empower companies to be able to do it. Like, I'm just curious as to your thoughts around that of like what's necessary and what you kind of think we need to see around data and data transparency.
Yeah, there's a bit of a tension here between getting started and getting it right.
Mm,
And so, another Marshall thing to say here is so in the Marine Corps, they said a perfect plan executed tomorrow is worse than a good plan executed today.
mm,
Right. So get started. In large part, climate and sustainability is a race against the clock. And so doing something now with imperfect information is better than waiting until you get, clean. But there is some of that clean has to happen, right? So, as a guy that used to work in the carbon markets, there was a lot of assumptions there that, frankly, as we've been kind of seeing through, public reporting and kind of criticism in the media, some of it unfounded, but a lot of it fair, is that we needed to kind of clean up the act in the carbon markets a little bit. Same sort of things happening within the data space. Like I somewhat challenge, like the idea that we should be using global warming potentials for the next 100 years as the baseline for converting numbers versus the GWP 20, because frankly, the next 20 years are the most important in all of human history, especially when it comes to climate. So you're going to see some of that sort of stuff that's happening.
yeah.
But further, when you get like really nerdy about this stuff, is that when these large companies are pushing into their supply chains, the need to report on some of this stuff, um, you are going to get just by dint of the fact that like you're not going to have like experts working on this, you're going to get rougher numbers. And what you're also doing is you're pushing the boundary of where the scope 3 estimation is happening from, the people that can do like more refined like scope 3 estimations down to people that are less capable of doing that because they still have their upstream scope 3 emissions associated with that. And so that's kind of an important thing. But for me, it comes back again to authenticity, which
Mm,
is tell everybody what your priors are, what your estimation factors are, report what you got. If next year it goes up and that's because there was a change in underlying assumptions, et cetera, then just say that. But also when you're doing that, do that analysis and be like, be honest about it. If we'd used
yeah.
the current assumptions in the previous year, would we have, had gone down or gone up for emissions? And be honest about that too.
Yeah.
Just be authentic. And I think that's the human story that kind of overlays the precision, because at the end of the day, um, everything is an estimate
Mm,
when it comes to like emissions accounting, right? So if you are to there's for example, in carbon accounting, these are all valid ways of calculating the footprint of a flight that you take. You can do it in a spend based accounting based on like I spent $500 on a plane ticket.
mm,
And X dollars of money spent in aviation equals roughly Y footprint. That's pretty good for kind of like broad estimates. But you and I know that if I spent $500, I go either to Duluth or to Dubai, depending on like what's the
yeah.
rate for the plane ticket. So $500 is not very precise as a way to convert it. Well, okay, maybe we need to go ahead and work it to okay, what was the fare class you were in, and the route of travel? Did you go direct to Detroit, or did you have a layover in Minneapolis? Okay, well, so then you start going that, but like that's also imprecise, right? Because you don't even know. It's more precise than spend based, but it's less precise than like if I know what aircraft type it was and what was the occupancy rate.
Mm,
The only people that actually know the footprint of this is United Airlines in this example, because they know how much gas they put from the truck into the plane and how much got burned in the plane. And so if you get focused on like how precise a data we can get before getting started, you're going to just wait for perfection, and
mm.
you're going to let in chase of perfect, you're going to let good get by.
Yeah. And I think it's challenging as well because there's a lot of pushback. I feel like there's a lot of pushback by big corporates. around not disclosing their emissions data. And yet, for those that are actually doing really well and actually, like uh, accounting where they can and reducing where they can, I actually think there's a market opportunity there where there, again, there is a story and stuff like that as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see that evolution of like, how do we view emissions and emissions reporting? And in that case, like if United's putting their information out, then it means that someone else, whether it's a business who took, if you were doing a business flight, then that business can look at what that looks like a little bit more accurately so that we can all be better about doing this and not just the big corporates, exactly kind of what you talked about at the top. So the big corporates need to, rather than being condescending, have to really help enable the small companies to be able to do this better so that we can all make improvement. It's
Yeah.
a great example.
Within the best case, I think it's, some of it's just the people, right? Which is that you have experts. And so, like, when you become an expert, sometimes you tend to focus on all kind of like the finer details, and you maybe unintentionally, probably unintentionally, tend to feel like nobody else could be able to do this because it took you so much time to be able to understand that level of complexity, right?
Yeah.
So, everybody's human. I'm not trying to, cast stones, but I would also say that sometimes there is a little bit, it does work to some of these larger corporates' interest to have the illusion of complexity as well.
Yeah.
There are some simple solutions that they could put together that would be able to engage with their supply chains in meaningful ways to start moving the ball forward. And is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be better than waiting? 100%.
Mm. No, I love that. Well, Mike, this has been such a fun conversation. I knew it would be. You and I always have a lot of fun when we get together and chat about these things. Any final thoughts or takeaways? Like, what are you excited about for the next kind of year? What are you looking out for? What's on your radar as we look out?
Um, so one of the things about like working in with the size businesses that I am, and the fact that this is a fairly human sort of connection is that I get to kind of ignore some of the noise that's in the ecosystem right now when it comes to politics. And so I was at this conference a couple days ago, and I ended up seeing Dr. Jonathan Foley, who's the head of Project Drawdown, and he was speaking, and he was talking about, and it echoed a lot of my thoughts. He was talking about big decisions typically only happen in government after they've kind of been broadly adopted by the public, right?
Mm.
And so they're the narrative that you're going to see in the news or on social media is the idea is that like climate action is doomed, we're not making any progress forward, and that's just not true. The people I'm talking to are doing the work, and we're seeing more demand for what we're doing. The regulations that support this sort of activity were never coming from the United States to begin with. They're coming from Europe, from California, from Australia.
Yep.
Um, they're coming from Mexico. They're coming from Singapore. They're coming from like the list goes on. And so this is moving forward. Whether the public perception, whether the public narrative is accurately portraying that. And I remain a climate optimist. I actually think that this is going to keep moving forward. I think that, there's some damage from, the consequences of our political choices. They're not going to be felt immediately in the short term. They will have like an effect in the long term. But they're not, the only thing they're going to do is slow the acceleration of this effort. They're not going to change the direction, let alone even change to reverse the velocity. It's not only moving forward, it's accelerating. The only thing they're doing is slowing the rate of acceleration.
Mm.
It's the rocket's going to make it to orbit. It's just going to take a little bit longer. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, I love that optimism. It's exciting, and it's good to see that it's the work is still continuing and that we're still making progress, even if it is a little bit slower. But with that, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me, Deb.